This week, we start off the show with Rob Lee, CEO and co-founder of Dragos, to talk about the year in cyber review for 2021. Then we have an interview featuring Sunil Shah, the organizer of Ring Zero and trainer of all things firmware security and emulation. In the security news, Singapore launches safety rating system for e-commerce sites. Watch out for Zixil, remote code execution vulnerabilities. A new Bluetooth attack that can unlock your Tesla. Hackers compromising a string of NFT Discord channels. A pen tester's attempt to be as realistic as possible backfires. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Cyber criminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cyber criminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Aaron Leyland, and my only job here today is to introduce the really young Paul S. Dorian, who is easily socially engineered and can pee like a dog in Vegas. Paul, over to you.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 741, recorded on May 18th, 2022, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, where our good friend, Mr. Aaron Leland, is here with us. Aaron, welcome.
Thank you, Paul.
For a short time before you get to catch your plane.
Yeah, sure. I've got to fly back to London tonight because I've got stuff to do, but thank you for having me.
It was good to have seen you back here in studio, of course.
It's great to be here, COVID and stuff. Last time was 2018, but lucky I seen you in Vegas at DEF CON and Black Hat 2019. It was a blast.
And then you spent some time in Ukraine.
Yeah.
You're amazing. Volunteering your time to train troops in Ukraine.
Yeah, I just went out there on a whim. I was sort of like a bit down in myself and needed...
I was worried about you, not going to lie. I was worried, but you made it work. I was worried, but then I was like, wait, it's Aaron. And you made it work, and you're going back.
Yeah, I'm going back. Everybody was great. Everybody from the Security Weekly family was amazing. And some of them donated so much money, I had to tell them to stop because it was like, I was like, guys, please stop. It's like, it's making me feel bad about you being my friends. But we managed to train, me and a guy called Trevor and Graham, really great guys, veteran Marines. We trained 425 people out there in 2 months, and we only went out there for 3 weeks.
Good for you. Thanks for doing that, man. And to Trevor, and who's the other person?
Graham.
Thank you. It's amazing.
Thank you, Paul.
Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Thank you. And, Aaron did not do enough promotion there, so if there are any big corporate sponsors out there that are listening to the show, make sure you look them up, see about getting that money donated. It is going to a good cause. I promise they need it out there as much as anybody, and I can't think of a better person to do it. So,
agreed. Mr. Josh Morpett is here with us. Josh, welcome.
Pleasure as always. I got to give props to Aaron as well. Did amazing things out there, and he's going to do more. So I can't wait to see what you're going to do next time, Aaron.
Thank you, sir.
Security Weekly listeners will save $100 on your RSA Conference 2022 full conference pass. The RSA Conference will be live in San Francisco June 6th through the 9th. Security Weekly will be there in full force, except for me, delivering real-time live coverage and interviewing some of the event's top speakers and sponsors. Register with our discount code by going to securityweekly.com/RSAC 2022. Use the code 52UCyber. Very excited to have Mr. Rob Lee on the show. Rob is the CEO and co-founder of Dragos. Rob gained his start in the U.S. Air Force as a cyber warfare operations officer, where he spent most of his career at the National Security Agency. There, he built and led the first of its kind mission hunting and analyzing state actors targeting ICS. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Proud to be here. Always good to not only be able to listen, but join you as well. And it's good to see a number of friendly faces again.
it's so nice to have you here, Rob. And I think you're one of the few guests I've interviewed that when I asked the question, how did you get started in information security? Like, there's like an entire book that talks about you and your life. I've been wanting to ask you since I've read it. Like, how do you feel about that?
I love the author, Andy. He's
Andy Greenberg, yeah.
Awesome. He's great. It's wonderful. All that aside, it's really freaking weird.
Yeah.
And honestly, Andy was always doing interviews on the record. He did everything appropriate as a journalist. Don't get me wrong, but I never knew he was going to write a book. And so, like, one day fun. I get a call, like, "Oh yeah, we're publishing this book. We're going to do some fact checking." I'm like, "What book? I haven't done any interviews." "Oh, for the last like 5 years of you talking to Andy, he's been taking notes." I'm like, "Holy shit!" And so yeah, it's a bit weird, especially when people like come up to me at the airport, either from like my Sands on Demand or from the book. And they'll like come up and be like, "Oh, Rob, it's great to see you. Happy anniversary. Your wife's anniversary is today, right?" I'm like, "Who the fuck are you?" You know, and it's like, "Oh no, I read about you." And I'm like, "But start with that. Start with hello."
Yeah.
Like, I'm George. Nice to meet you.
The book is called Sandworm. Just if you have not read it, it's one of my must reads in cybersecurity reading for sure. And the book talks a lot about you, Rob.
I'm
like George.
Andy didn't tell me. Yeah, Andy didn't tell me like, "Oh, you're a main character in the book."
Yeah.
But again, Andy's such a great journalist and such a good writer. It's a very compelling.
Was that something to do with Cyber Reason as well? Because they give me a copy of it.
Oh, no, I just think like Kim Zetter's book and then probably Andy's book are like the two. Welcome the community. You should definitely understand these, especially if you're doing anything in industrial. Like Kim and Andy both have been really good. And so I think a lot of the vendors pass those books out just because it's like, hey, here's real stories.
It was a great book. I'm sorry, I didn't know that you were the main character. I'm like fanboying, you know.
No, it's all good. And it's funny because like the audiobook is worse. Like the book again is great. But like the audio book like transcriber or whatever didn't know me obviously, and they just read that I'm from Alabama. So like the audio voiceover is like, "I gotta go to Africa to like turn on the electricity," and I'm like, "What the shit?"
I'm gonna listen to it on the plane.
It's
on
pretty
the way
bad.
Back. I'm gonna listen to it.
Yeah, I listened to it. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah, it's a great book though. It's a great book.
Yeah, no, Andy's awesome.
So, Rob, how did you get your start? Maybe for those that didn't read the book, give them the Cliff Notes kind of version.
Yeah, sure. So, chasing beer is the short answer. The long answer is my parents were enlisted in the Air Force. I always wanted to follow their path. I went out to the Air Force Academy, joined the military. But before doing that, I spent my summers doing humanitarian work in places like Cameroon, building control systems for water filtration, electricity, for wind renewables, et cetera. And I'm not an engineer. It was real basic crap. But I loved it. And I wanted to get back to Africa. And I wanted to go back to Cameroon and Niger and places like that and do that humanitarian work, because it was just something really cool about seeing control systems be in a place to help elevate communities. You know, clean water, clean power, just really, really beautiful what control systems
and Rob, to interrupt, good thing to get the water to the tobacco crop in Cameroon. I'm not sure if you're a cigar person, but Cameroon.
I am actually.
Yeah, so you know Cameroon wrapper is grown in Cameroon. They'll call it Cameroon wrapper, but it's just the seeds, and they grow it in Ecuador, so it's like Ecuadorian Cameroon. But the best Cameroon, comes from Cameroon, Africa.
It's absolutely critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I mean, we got a brewery in my office for science and analytics purposes. So,
of course.
Yeah, I totally love all the elements of automation. But
it's a random number generator for various different purposes. As the drips fall, or as the hygrometer, bubbles, that's a random number generator, right? For security reasons and encryption.
I mean, it's better than some of the encryption standards I've seen. So yeah, absolutely. So look, no, it was fun. And then I joined the Air Force, and they said, "You can be a pilot." And I said, "I don't want to."
Wow.
And they thought that was weird. And then I met the general, because like you got to tell them why you don't want to be. How dare you?
Yeah, right.
And I was like, "Yeah, my parents are enlisted." He's like, "Oh, never mind, I get it." And so they sent me to cyber school. It was like one of the first classes through used to be comm, and then it turned into cyber overnight.
Can I ask you what year that was? Yeah. What year was that? What year was that, please?
Oh, I'm a baby. That was 2010.
Oh, wow. Because I joined the Royal Air Force in 1995, and I did comms and cyber and stuff and some other things.
Yeah, but you guys were doing it. They just called it a different name.
Yeah,
and they finally just turned it into cyber on the U.S. Air Force side of the house in 2010. I was one of the first classes through there, and I was asking them like, cool, I don't really know all this other stuff, teaching to hack and all that stuff was fun. But I was like, what are you doing on control systems?
Right.
Like, what are control systems? I'm like, it's everything, like all of it, like everything we care about. And so I ended up doing well in the school, and they said, hey, you get your first pick of assignments. They said, going to the White House, protecting the president's networks, that'd be the best for you in your career.
Wow.
I was like, cool. What else is there?
Yeah.
Like,
Sorry.
Are you kidding me? I was like, I don't really care.
So
like,
cool.
what else is there? And they're like, some bullshit podunk assignment in Germany. I'm like, Germany? Beer? I'm going to, I want that one.
Vorsteiner.
When I got there, it was a cover site for the NSA, which is now public because of Eddie. And when I showed up, they were like, you're in charge. I'm like, in charge of what? And they're like, find the unknown unknowns. I'm like, I have no idea what that means. They're like, we don't either, but Rumsfeld was really big into it. I was like, okay, let's focus on control systems. And they're like, what are control systems? I'm like, we'll get through it. And that was the whole start.
You Johari windowed your way into relevancy. Well done, sir.
Yeah, it was one of those things where like I was in the White House briefing all the right people and all the generals and everything else. And I'm a young captain at that point by that time. And I shouldn't have been talking to any of those people. But there was nobody else focused on ICS, threat discovery, industrial control systems for the audience members, like threat discovery. And I was like propelled in my career a lot further than I should have been. And then they put me on the offensive side of the government. And I'll be candid here. I generally think everybody should stay the hell out of everybody else's civilian infrastructure. So I quit. And that's I was happy just teaching at SANS and doing that until the Ukraine 2015 thing happened. And when I came back and briefed everybody on the attack, I saw all these CSOs telling everybody, let's copy and paste our IT strategy over to the plants and manufacturing sites and stuff. And out of a strong desire for my kid to have lights and water when he grows up, I started Dragos. And that's it.
That is really cool. It's like, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it, but at the end of my career, I ended up working at GCHQ. And I don't know enough about CNI like you, but I know how important it is. It's cool stuff.
I love the boys and girls and others out in the West Country. They were always good partners of ours. And
I worked there.
I don't think we can give them all the credit that we're allowed to your point. Like,
no, I think the British government did turn around and say that we do offensive cyber against ISIS.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, the GCHQ guys and gals and others were honestly some of the best people I've ever worked with.
They're awesome.
They were honestly just phenomenal. And they make salaries of the GCHQ.
Yeah, they make a really low salary. I know what they make.
£20,000 a year.
Right? No, and like when they go up through the stages, it's like the money's pittance. It really is. But wow,
they are there for the mission, and they're just wonderful people.
Yeah, they're really cool. And do you know what? So I don't want to take over things. I'm sorry. But the neurodiversity there is amazing. And they literally hire neurodiverse people, and they have neurodiverse clubs. And I'm a bit neurodiverse myself, as I'm sure we probably all are. But the neurodiversity there is wonderful.
They're just so inclusive, and it shows. Mm-hmm. I mean, when we talk about we'll talk about diversity at Dragos, and because we've got 500 and something employees now, and we really try to put a big focus on.
I'm unemployed.
I mean, you should. And people ask me all the time.
Ish.
Sorry.
I'm unemployed-ish.
Oh yeah.
We won't talk about that on air.
Carly Rae Jepsen me, but the reality is, like, people talk about diversity as if it's the right thing to do, and it is, but it's also a selfishly good thing to do. Like, you get better answers, you get better thought process around the table. And the GCHQ, to your point, was so good. I remember this is an Evel Knievel leap to this story, but the first time I was up there with them, they wanted to go out drinking, and they said, "Oh, you Americans can't hold your alcohol." And I said, "I'm from Alabama. Like,
we drink moonshine.
I'll be all right."
Yeah, right.
You know?
We make our own.
And, my first shot at Jack Daniels, unfortunately, was at the age of 3. Like, my uncle thought he was funny. Like, I'll be all right. And we go out, and I go to the bar, and they're already there. They're all sitting around the table. And this guy across the table wants to get in a drink contest with me, the GCHQ guy. I was like, sure, whatever. And we're going through every shitty thing from Goldschlager to tequila, just back to back to back to back to back. And by the end, I'm dying. And I'm like, how in the hell is this guy keeping up? And I think we were shot 18 or 19 into it or something. And I was like, I'm tapping out. And he was like, thank God, because I'm done too. And then he rolls out from behind the chair. And the GCHQ guys were like, never challenge a guy that doesn't have to walk out of the bar. Like, I hadn't noticed. And again, just the GCHQ was always so much better about making an inclusive work environment. And it showed for the level of expertise they were able to deliver.
When I got there, I was amazed by it, sort of being neurodiverse myself, maybe having ADHD and stuff like that, or ADD, whatever. It's currently unconfirmed. It will probably always stay like that. But the diversity there, like, everything from sexual diversity to sort of men and women to neurodiversity, it was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. And do you know what? I was never in a room where everybody wasn't smarter than me. It was fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the last compliment I'll pay to GCHQ, and then we can get off this crap before I lose my NSA card.
Yeah, right.
Is the last compliment I'll pay is the best joke I've ever heard from a West Country person. And they said, Rob, it's true. The NSA is the best in the world. You guys are better than GCHQ. I was like, yeah, great. And he's like, it's fair for me to admit that y'all are twice as good as the GCHQ for 10 times the amount of money.
Well, yeah, right. They should give GCHQ more money. They definitely should give GCHQ more money.
That was good. It's accurate, but it hurt.
I'm sorry to hijack, guys, but wow.
I thought it was a great conversation and important to highlight diversity as an asset, certainly. We've always pitched it as that on the show. Working in IT and security, having people from different backgrounds is just, it's amazing, right? In really any field, I think it's amazing. So that was awesome. Rob, I want to dig in on, you had started Dragos and some stuff was going down in Ukraine. Can we pick the story up there without spoiling too much from the book? Because weren't you getting married at the time? If I recall?
Yeah, so she's still with me, which I appreciate. And so I hadn't started Dragos yet. I was just teaching at SANS. Mike Asante, when he was still here with us, was probably the closest thing to like brother and father and best friend and mentor to me. Like, Mike was everything to me. And Mike had brought me into the beginning of the ICS development over at SANS and looked at the class, and Justin Searle was just phenomenal.
Yep.
Course author and instructor, was building 410 at the time, which is an introduction. And Mike was like, look, this is what your NSA guys need. I was like, no, this is what the community needs for sure. But my folks are doing different things. And I need like this combination of incident response, threat hunting, intel, malware analysis. Like, there's this whole kludge of things. And Mike was like, well, shit, if you're so smart, make it yourself. And I'm like, no, I'm not saying I'm smart. And he's like, well, too bad, you're making it. And so that's his challenge to me.
So Mike was the inspiration for you to create Dragos?
It was the inspiration for me to be an ICS outside the government. Mike was, I could not pay a higher compliment to the fact that everything I am today professionally stems from Mike Asante. And so I started developing 515, the SANS class, and teaching with my leave when I was still a military officer, just because of Mike's challenge. And then he finally said, Rob, you could do more good here than at the agency. When they put me, because the agency didn't put me on the offense, the Air Force put me on the offensive side of the arm, and he saw the confliction with like the ethics concerns I had. And so he kind of convinced me to jump ship. All I ever wanted to be was in the military. All my family was in the military. I was going to live and die there. And he convinced me to jump out. And so I started at SANS. And it was just a couple months later in December, I decided to get married, because we'd always been dating, but being married in the military and trying to think about having kids in the military can be complicated. And so I was like, oh, I'm a civilian now. Shit, I'll get married. And it was the day before the wedding, I got a text from some Ukrainian counterparts that I had, because I'd been stationed in Germany and led partners there and so forth and so on and whatever, and said, hey, our power system's down. I was like, okay, shit happens. Yeah, well, we think it's the Russians. I'm like, of course you do. Sure, well, good job. And they're like, no, it could be a siren.
I hate to laugh at that, giving today's context.
Yeah, but but power systems go down.
And it was also one of the things that Sandworm gave me some glimpse into, is that struggle between Russia and Ukraine.
Oh, absolutely. And again, but power systems go down, and we joke about squirrels. It is a joke. It's not as serious as people make it out to be, but squirrels cause more power outages than Russia, Iran, China combined, And so I kind of jokingly said back to him, which Andy captioned in the book. I was like, dude, it could have been a squirrel. I don't know, but I'm getting married tomorrow. This is not important. And so I kind of brushed it off. And then the next morning, like a couple hours before my wedding, Mike Asante texted me and said, Rob, I think it's real. I was like, shit. I was like, let me wrap up this wedding thing. And so I very sheepishly went to my wife and said, I think I'm going to have to not be at our party, but I can stay for the wedding. And so we did the wedding and then I left. And I got her a honeymoon in New Zealand, like, a year later. Like I think we're square ish. And so we have a kid now, so it counts.
You didn't attend your own wedding reception.
No, I didn't. Yeah. So again, she's a very patient woman.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Well,
I mean,
I'm going to say, Rob, that patience in this case means that she's waiting for the next honeymoon.
I know, yeah. Or the next husband if I screwed it up too much.
Well, details. But you owe her at least one more honeymoon somewhere more exotic.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. Yeah, anyways, she's very
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah. She's very nice to me. So, got involved, did it, had fun, all that good stuff. And probably what shocked me the most though is when he came back, and I don't know if this was in the book or not, but when we came back, the U.S. government, and I think there's a lot of wonderful people there, don't get me wrong, but the U.S. government wanted to deny it and ignore it. And I couldn't understand it because we've always talked as a country like, hey, if somebody attacks critical infrastructure, that's the red line. And I was like, why don't you guys want to talk about this? This is a big deal. You don't have to say it's Russia, but you got to talk about this. And the message that I got back from the White House, and names will remain nameless, but the message I got was, this was now January 2016. Hey, it's an election year. And when people feel insecure, they blame the incumbent party. And so we don't want to make them feel insecure about the electric system or it'll show up in the vote. And so they decided not to even pretend it could happen. And a lot of messaging came out of the government of, don't worry, this can't happen here. And the real heroes in the story, I mean, there's some drama that happened, but the real heroes in the story were actually the electric companies. The electric company CEOs started going to the White House, started going to Congress, started going to everybody else going, no. This can happen here, and we need to start taking this seriously. And that's when the narrative changed. And about 6 months later, instead of Mike and I being treated like we were the lepers of the discussion, they brought us back in and started letting us go and talk more widely about what had actually happened. And
did you come back from Ukraine with what you believed was evidence that it was Russia?
We didn't, and I'll play some pedantry / nuance here that people could rightfully critique, but it's a position that I have. I don't ever focus on attribution, and I don't really care about it. I think people should have attribution for geopolitical purposes, but for network defense, I think it's kind of useless, to be honest. And my position was, I don't care who did it, but I can attribute it to the Sandworm group. So I was the original one that said, hey, the stuff that these eyesight guys are tracking over here, which then got bought up by Mandy, bought up by FireEye. I said, these eyesight guys, this John Hildechrist and these folks over here, they're right. That this Sandworm group is who did this. And so the U.S. government later came out and said, Sandworm is Russia. And so it was kind of this transitive attribution of sorts. But my analysis was not Russia did it. My analysis was, here's what happened, how it occurred, and how we need to defend ourselves elsewhere.
How have we gotten better at defending ICS since then, Rob?
I think two big things probably three big things have happened. Number one, Mike's vision of building people and putting focus on people and not just technology. I think at the SANS Institute and others, there's just been a massive increase in the number of professionals who understand industrial environments. And that's just a giant win across the board. Number two, it has become a board level and world level leader topic. Like, I'm going to Davos next week and speaking to world leaders about this. And the idea that some dumbass kid from Alabama is speaking OT security to presidents and heads of state is really silly on the surface, but it just shows you the level of attention that it's getting, because most companies have always been focused on cybersecurity of critical infrastructure, but they've been spending 10 times the amount of money on the website than they were the gas turbine. And they're just starting to realize that. And so they realize there's just this unappreciated risk they have. And probably the third thing at a technical level is there's also a market now. And so it's very easy to pick on vendors it's very easy to chastise vendors for some of the absolute asinine stuff they do. But having multiple vendors that are servicing the ICS security market and being able to be there focused on ICS and not just reskinning IT crap is really important to providing the tooling that then those people that were trained need to go show value and show that this is a doable thing. It's not some mythical hard challenge. If you put the hard work in, you actually can secure industrial infrastructure. So I think those three things have met this like perfect mix of time and opportunity to a place that we're seeing the companies that are leaning in just make massive improvements. And that's also why you're seeing more threats. From an NSA perspective, if we had one new group targeting industrial, if we had one new state actor targeting industrial sites, it was like a presidential level brief. Now there's 19 of them, but it's not like they just appeared out of nowhere. They've been there, but we've had the equivalence of like Schrodinger's ICS. People weren't looking inside the box. People are looking inside the box now and going, oh, those jackasses are here. And we're getting better visibility, which helps us get a better understanding of the actual issue.
Tyler, you had a question.
No, yeah, I think that was answering a lot of it. I was kind of curious from both the defensive side and the visibility side. Like, we are starting to lean on the vendors in the appropriate ways. We see vendors actually caring and making some of those OT jumps. You're saying there's a lot more security focus with people in mind. Are we seeing that bridge gapped for the integrators and the implementation people, the people that actually are running on the OT side, where they're typically not, technologists, they're not in IT, they don't have any security? Are we starting to see that jump happen where it's making enough of a difference? We've kind of gotten to the step one where we've acknowledged we have a problem, but are we making that next leap to fill that gap in an appropriate manner?
I don't think so at the integrator and the OEM or the original equipment manufacturer base. And that's not to say that the Honeywells and Emersons and Yokogawas and Siemens and of the world don't have amazingly smart people that actually care. That's not what I'm saying. But one of the problems I see, and one of the things I'm actually a little bit concerned about, is now there's an appreciation that this is a problem. There's a lot of people jumping in that want to help, and it's so well-intentioned, but they don't fully understand the problem yet. They're just kind of welcome to the party, pal kind of thing. And so they're bringing the IT security playbook over with all the right intentions. And then they're like stapling those guidance and the standards and frameworks to the OEMs. And it's pushing the vendors to do things that are actually not risk reduction. So as an example, if you walked into an enterprise IT environment, you said, I want better vulnerability management. I want EDR in my systems. I want encryption of my network traffic. You would look like a rock star. Those three things, like, of course, we got to have those things. In ICS, those three things are almost pointless. And the way that I try to explain this to people is in enterprise security, it's very system security and data security. I really care what you can do on a system, and I really care what you can do with my data. And therefore, product security is really closely aligned to that system security, meaning it's a big part of cybersecurity in the enterprise. If Microsoft screws up Active Directory, everybody's feeling that pain for a while. But in industrial, it's systems of systems and physics. I don't really care what you can do with any one system. So I don't really care about the vulnerabilities or exploits or anything on that one system. I care about your ability to impact system one in such a way that you impact system two in such a way that there's a physical manifestation in system three. And you don't need a vulnerability to do that. You just need to know that that system operates that turbine, and I can increase the settings and the parameters of the control system to create an unsafe condition. Like, if you know the engineering, you don't need the system view, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so the problem for the vendors is they get a lot of RFI and RFP questions about IT security controls, copy and pasted operations. So they're being led down, in my opinion, the wrong path. And I think from an integrator perspective, it's never part of the budget. And so they're just going to go in and make sure that you have a good, carbon cracker. They're not really going to care about the security around it. And that's not true of everybody, but it's a large enough problem at scale that my concern is, are we getting better enough in comparison to the velocity of the problem increasing? And it's not an IT-OT convergence discussion. That shit happened a decade ago. The real problem is we're getting hyper-connected. Call it digital transformation, Industry 4.0, whatever buzzword you want to use. But we're getting hyper-connected at a time that our adversaries know to target those systems. And it's that connectivity adversary convergence that's driving a significant level of risk.
Robert, it sounds like Sorry. Go ahead, Tyler.
No, I was just going to say, how do you think as security professionals we begin to start helping bridge that gap, because we don't have that 10 to 20 years that we've spent in IT to kind of come up with this and do this well, and making that OT jump, bringing the IT playbook obviously is not helping. So what is I would say, what is the matter in which the security community can bring their expertise in a meaningful manner over to OT without, hamstringing or causing that same Achilles tendon, and without bringing some of the old bad habits? I mean, it's a different market, it's a different industry. The problems are different, but in and of themselves, the root causes are a lot the same. So how do we bring some of those lessons learned without also bringing some of the stuff that isn't helpful and make a difference from the security standpoint of this?
Oh, yeah. Beautiful question. In my opinion, the first thing you need to do is learn the mission of that site. And so I have a blog that I put, everyone always asks me how do I get started in ICS security. And so almost out of a self-service to myself to stop answering that question, I just wrote the blog, right? And I always send them a link. And the first 20 links in that blog are not, here's how you do Wireshark analysis, here's how you do vulnerability management, here's how you do, the first 20 links are, here's how a wastewater treatment facility works. Here's how electric power generation works. And it's almost like you could find somebody that sits down and watches, I think it's on the Discovery Channel, the How It's Made TV show. And if they watch How It's Made and their face lights up, that's a good ICS security person. They're going to be okay in our field. If you can get excited about the physics of it, I don't need you to do heat transfer, calculations, but if you can understand, what are we doing here? What is the purpose of this site? What is the manufacturer trying to do here? Then you can realize, okay, well, then what would a bad day look like? What are the scenarios that we need to be concerned with? Not what are we doing in VPN security? What are we doing in business email security? What are we doing in No. What are the scenarios that we care about? And then from there, based on my experience with security, if you care about those scenarios, here's the 5 things that I really think matter in this scenario.
Rob, shouldn't we do that?
Let you bridge it.
Shouldn't we do that with anything we're trying to secure?
I mean, I don't want to be the ICS guy that comes and tells enterprise IT people how to live their lives, but I would.
Yeah.
I think that is a better way to do it anyways. Yeah.
Because I don't think the approach for me, and I think many of us listening and hearing the show, would be the same whether we're trying to secure a device, a product, software, or an organization of any size or type.
Yeah, I think that is a very mature way to approach it. I think in the massive market that exists, most of the conversations are what's the standard, what's the framework, what's the whatever, and that leads to a copy and pasting. But to your point, thinking about systems as analysis, I had some Forrester analyst say this to me one time. He said, hey, the stuff you're talking about in ICS is a lot like we're thinking about cloud application security and all the systems of systems. And actually, if we went to this more scenario-based view, it would align with that. I'm like, oh, cool. So I think there's probably some legs there.
Yeah, I think, I certainly don't want to say I got everything right or everything wrong throughout my career. One of the moments I pull on is similar to what you were describing, Rob, when I was sitting down at a university with the team that's responsible for some, Windows systems that controlled some, if it was building or whatever, it was basically like an ICS type system.
Yeah.
And I started my question, asked them, so what's your day look like? What do these systems control? How do you control them? What's a good day? What's a bad day? And they're like, why do you need to know all that? We just want you to tell us what patches we should apply. I'm like, no, that's not why I'm here. I need to understand what you do, why it's important, how it impacts the organization. Then we can talk about what's important for security and integrity of your systems. But I need to know how you work first and what's important to you before we can secure anything.
100%. Yep.
I spend more time.
That mindset of let me walk
yes.
into the plant and ask you questions before I give you an answer, plus taking a box of donuts and a case of beer every now and then in the plant. Welcome to the ICS community. Yeah.
I was once asked, if you only had $100 in your security budget, what would you do to improve security? Yeah, I said I'd take out as many employees as I could and buy them all beer, and we'd sit around and talk.
Yeah, see, you're an ICS security professional.
I find that
I've dabbled. I worked for Dale for a little while, actually, which is a lot of fun. Dale's a great guy.
No, he's a total good guy.
A long time ago, I figured out that figuring out what the right question to ask is a lot harder for most companies to do than understanding what the answer could be.
You know what's funny, Josh? I was listening to a podcast about business and entrepreneurship, and they said the best advisors and investors are not the ones that can fix all the things, but they know the right questions to ask and know what the right answers are to them, or what a good answer is versus a bad answer to know whether you're going to invest or not.
It shows an understanding of the wider view. And it shows an understanding of, and when I talk to companies, I advise a lot of companies. And when I talk to them, I swear to God, half the time I don't think that question's the right question. Let's back up a step.
Yeah.
And let's talk about where you're coming from. Where's your use case, your business case? What are you doing? What are the goals of why you're asking me this stuff? And it oftentimes comes to more of a strategic discussion than even a technological discussion. So it's a fascinating point.
But Rob, back to what's important for OT and in IT, I think there are a lot of similarities, but it sounds like in listening to you that maybe some of the priorities are different in OT. And integrity of the systems is a higher priority than in IT?
It can be. It can be. So everybody likes to use the CIA triad. And I mean, it's just a model. All models are wrong, but some are useful. Discussion, right? It always gets quoted. And in some industries, if you're a nuclear power operator, the integrity of the commands that are going to that Westinghouse AP1000 boiling water reactor really matter a lot more than the availability. But are you I got a customer, we don't want to get into much details, but I got a customer that creates a very specialized product, and they haven't shut down the plant for 15 years, and it's not scheduled to be shut down for another 10 years. And any disruption to that is a multi-billion-dollar problem for them. Availability for them is the highest level. So I see people come out and talk about CIA, it applied to ICS, it's upside down. Availability is the highest. And like, it depends on the plant, depends on the industry. But the point you're making, which is very accurate, is we can have different priorities. And based on that systems of systems versus system view, it can mean really different things. A great example, vulnerabilities in ICS. Some point when an IT security person walks into an ICS for the first time, and I've done it too, right? The first time you're there, you go, oh, it's Windows NT and Windows XP, and look at all these vulnerabilities, and oh my God, how do I secure this? And you go, great, but what would make the lights blink? I'm like, what? I mean, what would you do to make the lights blink? Like I don't think it's the MSO867 vulnerability that you're concerned with. What do you actually care about? And what you'll find is vulnerabilities that get you into the ICS and vulnerabilities that add net new functionality to the ICS that wasn't already there. Those matter a lot. Everything else, hell, I already have the ability to modify the logic on a control system from an engineer workstation. Why do I need a vulnerability for that? I just need an understanding of the system. And when you apply that filter, it's 4%. So our Intel team, we're a tech company, but our Intel team went through all the vulnerabilities for ICS every year. And there's about 1,500 every year, and found that 4% were things that you really needed to go fix. The rest of it didn't add any real risk to the ICS. And so I'm not saying vulnerability management, as an example, is not worthwhile, but a focused risk-based approach to that 4%, there's no reason to yell at the operator for the 96%. It's just not a priority for any real reason.
I also find that in ICS, change is a lot harder. I think in IT, I like to think maybe too optimistically, that we have more ephemeral systems on the IT side of the house than we do versus. I think when I compare it to ICS, that's absolutely true. I also think there's IT organizations that have the big legacy mainframe and stuff like that, like you said, in the ICS world, that's been running for 15 years and has never been rebooted, and we can't touch it. And I think, but those are the exceptions, not the rule. In ICS, you really have systems that are long running and cannot be changed easily at all. Is that really one of the huge differences when we talk about OT versus IT?
It's a huge challenge for sure. We have systems that are meant to operate for 20 to 30 year life cycles. And the idea that we're going to do an upgrade on it is ridiculous. And you have to think about defending those systems. But again, to me, everything you have in IT, we have in OT. Like we've got Windows operating systems, we got all that stuff. But in our environment, OT is really just all the things you have in IT plus physics.
Yeah.
And that physics element just changes a lot in how you think you're going to approach the problem. And so people want to look at it from, well, they say it's a specialized control system, but it's actually just this underlying operating system that's very similar to a Linux system. You're missing the point. The point is that system has this function in this environment that if you misabuse it, someone dies. Give you a great example. There was an explosion out in California years ago on a pipeline, had nothing to do with cyber, but the pipeline exploded and people died. what was one of the contributing factors? Not the only thing, it's not so simple, but one of the contributing factors is an IT administrator came over to the operations side of the house and did a database join on a system. And that database join, by the size of the database, lagged out the system where they didn't get the critical alarm, so the operators couldn't respond in time. A database join has never killed anybody in enterprise. It's literally killed people in the ICS side of the house. It's just a different way to think.
I think there's a lot of hesitation too when I think about, recently I look at the firmware on my laptop and I'm like, well, that has a vulnerability. I'm like, yeah, but like I got a podcast, I got like meetings to do. And then I'm like, then I forget about it. And I'm like, I should really do that. And this is my laptop, right? This is like one of my 3 computers. And there's hesitation, largely because I know like a firmware update could really screw things up potentially. It could brick my system. Now we translate that to the ICS world. And that's where I get really concerned about firmware. Let's talk about firmware security for a moment. Like, how do I do that in an ICS environment when I'm hesitant to update my own damn laptop?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, this just goes into a broader supply chain discussion. And when you look at supply chain, I don't worry about the super micro fake Bloomberg stories. What I worry about is twofold. It's the software and connectivity piece, which is the firmware, and then like Honeywell and Emerson and everybody else connecting in. They're great firms, but connecting into these sites, that access creates opportunity. But the other piece of the supply chain, which I don't think gets enough discussion in the cybersecurity community, is the supply chain to get the equipment regardless of cyber influence, right? So like, as an example, if you're on the electric power system and we have a transmission piece of equipment go out, a really core transformer or transmission equipment, in a good environment, you're getting that replaced in 9 months out of China. And I'm saying if they're trying to be nice and they're trying to be polite and they're trying to help you. And normally in normal operating conditions, you can kind of predict that a little bit, right? We have some understanding of when it might fail. You can see hurricanes, you can tell weather patterns. But if you layer on cyber and you layer on attacks, now we can't predict that as easily. And the idea of getting the equipment we need just to be sustainable as a country can be 9-month plus windows. And then you look at the changing the electric system where we're going to renewable energy, which is just wonderful. And it's really good to see the climate change efforts that are underway. But inverter-based resources, so solar and wind, when you're just putting direct current and your direct power, inverter-based resources don't create inertia. The only thing that creates inertia is big spinning equipment. And so if we're taking off gas-fired facilities and coal-fired facilities, et cetera, you're losing big spinning equipment, which means there's no more inertia on the system, which means if anything happens, it's really brittle now and it's hard to respond to. So the bigger problem with supply chain to me is the changing nature of our systems, the growing complexity of the industrial automation, and the reliance on foreign partners. And that's not putting down foreign partners, it just makes it more complicated. And now a cyber attack that 15 years ago wasn't that big of a deal in a highly resilient system, now when the system's operating at a knife's edge, is overweighted. And that's where you can have real impact.
Is there not enough resiliency to do some of those things, Rob? In other words, if you got a PLC, like I've done this in IT, many of us have done this, right? I've got a system running, I deploy the new system in parallel so that I can screw things up, but I got to screw up 2 things before bad things happen. Are physical systems like PLCs in that same boat? In other words, rather than updating the firmware on the device that's running, maybe I deploy a new device that does the same function and I can put that in parallel and then phase out the old.
Some of your higher revenue generating companies at their critical sites can do stuff like that. They can't at their non-critical sites, and the other companies that aren't as highly revenue generating can't afford that luxury. And so I think if you're talking about the 1% of the industrial community, they are rock stars and it's real hard.
But that takes money, right? Because they can go procure equipment and deploy it.
Absolutely. I mean, people were yelling about Oldsmar facility last year when an attacker broke in and tried to add lye to the water system and try to hurt people. It was a big deal. And it's, I mean, I don't care about the technical realities of it. Somebody tried to hurt Americans on American soil through attack on ICS. It's a big deal. But people are then like yelling at them and then talking about how we need to secure our water systems. And like, what? There are 55,000 water systems across the United States. And most of them have to share an IT person between like 6 of them because of the cost. let alone security, and let alone ICS security. So stop. Like, what are you talking about? So it's kind of a have and haves not community sometimes, and I think we forget the operating realities. Like, one of the core realities of American infrastructure is we underpay for a lot of our utility infrastructure. Like, we don't pay enough money to keep Flint, Michigan up and running with clean water, let alone cyber. So now that we're trying to tell them to prepare against Russia, I'm from Alabama. You want to go to Coleman Power Cooperative and tell my parents and all the people in the town that they need to add $1 to the electric bill during inflation because Russia might attack? Like, that's not happening. It's just naive.
How
do you think there's another way to kind of combat that then? Because I think you're 100% right. That's been one of my big arguments is, if you want to get people in, you have to attract talent. You want security people, like, we have to expand budget. If you want to expand budget, that means you have to pay more for something that you're paying less for and stop trying to drive the bottom dollar. So what are the alternatives to that scenario in order to kind of combat this?
Yeah, there are some things that can work, and we're working on them, and I can go into details on them. But by and large, I don't see an answer today for your question. I spend an enormous amount of time on the Hill. Tomorrow, I'm going down to brief a bunch of senators on this exact same question. And we can all appreciate the problem. We kind of all know how to solve it. It's not AI and blockchain or whatever. Like, we know what to do. It's like hard work, but we know what to do. But the mechanisms to get it done are almost impossible. Again, rising inflation, and take this macro environment. Compressing multiples in the market, stock down at most companies 30% or more on the year, appropriately so, but getting back to the 5-year historical trends. You have rising inflation. You have concerns about attacks. What senator or congressman is going to go to their constituent and say, I know things are bad right now, but we want to charge you more? And that's honestly the right answer, but I don't think that's a politically viable answer. And the reality is, what then happens is people put things into like subsidies and try to hide it. Look at CISA. I think CISA does a wonderful job in so many ways, but they get asked to do everything. They're not resourced to do that. Hell, they shouldn't be doing it. Half the stuff that they're trying to get asked to do from Congress is competitive with the open market. It's already available. It's completely insane that they're getting asked to do that, but they're getting treated like crazy, saying, "Oh, well, you need to be in charge of this." And so then they float billion-dollar budgets to CISA, which is still not enough for all they're getting asked to do. But really, all you're talking about is subsidizing the problem, which should be pushed back to a state and local level.
That was my question, is that a place, because CISA is so in such a good place right now and in a horrible place? They're being way overutilized in way too many places. They're doing a great job. But is it a good time, because of the visibility and optics they have and the leadership they have, to subsidize and roll that control and planning with inside of that for the next 5 to 10 years in order to make it politically viable?
Yeah, they can't do it. So Jen Easterly, Eric Goldstein, Rob Silver, as you look around the room, you're not going to get better. They're just wonderful people. And so you're right. It's an amazing time to do it. But there's no amount of resources they could do, because they also don't have the mechanism to utilize it. Here's a fundamental problem. Let's take a tangent, which I think will come back to prove the point. An electric utility, I keep picking on the electric utility industry, but they do a lot of good work. An electric utility is very familiar with FBI or somebody coming to them and going, here's a classified briefing about this vendor and they're doing really bad things and you shouldn't use them. And they go, oh, okay, I shouldn't use them. Great. Can you put that on record so I can use that? And they're like, what? No, it's classified. Like, but I'm managed by a public utility commission. If they're the lowest bid, I legally have to go with them. I need you to come out and say something, or I can't ignore the public utility commission. And they go, oh, we can't talk about that. So then an electric company will have to buy a product that they know is already compromised, or they know has already got national security level issues that the federal government already knows about, but they can't do anything about it. Good example with this, in the Trump administration, one of the things they try to do is ban Chinese transmission equipment. And people always thought it was based on cyber. It had nothing to do with cyber. And it wasn't trying to say China's bad. It was saying waiting 9 months for transmission equipment is not acceptable at a national security basis. We need to start looking at domestic manufacturing of transmission equipment. But then everybody got crazy about, you can't block the free market and business and all this. So long story short, every utility and every infrastructure owner is left to their own on their supply chain, the vendors, everybody else. And what really should happen in this discussion is government should be able to say, I don't care. We're not picking winners and losers, but you got to be this tall to ride the ride. Here's the parameters that you got to be able to do as a vendor to be in our critical infrastructure. And then you could do that. But the government doesn't want to pick winners and losers. They don't have the political appetite for that. So you then come it down to something like the CISA conversation. And you come back to, even if they had the budget, they would need to lean on vendors. But for them to even go through an RFP or even any engagement, there's so many lobbyists and defense industrial based stuff and everything else. It becomes hyper bloated and it never works. And so I don't want to come off as a cynic. There's so many wonderful things that can work. And we've seen examples. The 100-day action plan last year in the electric sector, over 100 utilities rolled out technology and started sharing in real time insights from their operations environments. It was the biggest step up in ICS security in history. It can happen, but it was done by the utilities. It wasn't done with government or anybody else. And it was just because the utilities had the maturity to say, let's go. So while I'm a big fan of CISA and the leadership and the people over there, the mechanisms to leverage the revenue, mechanisms to leverage the budget they get in of itself is not sufficient for what we need to do across the country.
I think you add one more point into that also comes into play now is the procurement. You were talking about the procurement part of this and putting stuff out to bid. A lot of the time for those RFPs, you have to have a certain level of cyber insurance now. Now, with a lot of the cyber insurance getting savvy to the attacks and your ability to get a policy at the level in which a lot of these places are requiring you to operate, you're now getting an even smaller pool of places to do work with. And whether or not they're good or not really depends on the cyber insurance they're carrying.
Absolutely. No, there's just so much complexity here. And again, I think there are very obvious things to be done. And we can all sit around and agree on what those obvious things are and boil it down to like 5 things that people could agree on. And it would still be years navigating the system to try to go implement those things. And sometimes bureaucracy is good and that hurts everybody's soul, but sometimes it is. When I was in the NSA, bureaucracy was good. You don't want a knee-jerk intelligence community. You want somebody that has to put in the effort and go through the approval process and everything else to protect rights and freedoms and everything else. And we're not always perfect at it, but you want that bureaucracy. But when you actually have a path forward in a critical national security issue, there's a reason we have like emergency powers and emergency act authorities and et cetera in other areas. But in cyber, I don't know that we actually have the political appetite to do those things. Oh man, I feel like I'm like the downer on this. Like I was coming here like, oh, it's so happy, it's great. And like there's a lot of good stuff happening, guys. So there's you're just asking good questions.
You should tell us about some of the cool stuff you guys are working on. Really, I've not been following as closely as I should, and I would love to know like some of the new stuff you're putting out, some of the visibility, different things that are happening even in ICS security that people may not be aware of.
Yeah, and sorry, Rob, my pause and hesitation was I could spend another hour talking with you, and all of us could, right? And we have another interview, so I was like, what question can I ask that isn't as long for an answer because someone's going to be waiting to come on, and I'm totally going to have you back because there's a lot more threads to pull on. But I think Tyler's question is good and was one on my list too. You say you had 500 people working for you at Dragos?
Yeah, we have 520 staff, and we'll have 630 by the end of the year. It's
Congrats,
crazy.
man. Congrats.
Thanks.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So what's happening? Talk about the, your mission at Dragos and the products briefly, because I want people to understand those at least at a high level. Yeah. And then I have 5 silly questions for you.
Great. High level. The mission is safeguarding civilization. It sounds arrogant, but that's our mission statement. And what that means to me is we can't just take care of the big companies that can pay us. We got to figure out something that works for everybody. And so what do? Yeah, we're a tech company. We have a product that deploys into these ICS networks to give people network visibility, understanding the commands and control equipment and what you have, detect threats and help you respond to it. We also have an amazing services and intel team just to help our customers on the journey. People like getting called in for instant response, our intel team tracking the threats. So that's fun stuff. We got hundreds of customers around the world doing really wonderful things, and a lot of people that help us. But probably one of the things that I'm most proud of, which goes to that safeguarding civilization discussion, is something that has nothing to do with revenue. And that's where I feel there's kind of this unspoken rule in the infrastructure community that those who can pay should, but those who can't pay, you got to take care of. So we launched this program called the Community Defense Program that for any utility, gas, water, electric, under 100 million in revenue, We're just giving our technology, our managed service, our incident response retainer, our online learning management system for all the training, everything for free. And so it was just really cool to be able to go out, and we always talk about taking care of the small players. Congress, everybody always talks about that. And nobody does it. And it's not that expensive, but they just don't do it. And so it was great to say, hey, hundreds of other big companies, because you chose Dragos as your partner, we can actually just go fix this. And so we were able to onboard something like 70 small cooperatives and munis in like a really short amount of time when we launched the program. And I'm hoping to get up to 1,000 or so over the next 2 years. So that's the kind of stuff that I get excited about.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's the kind of help I think they need, Rob, right? Because we can talk about regulations, guidelines, assistance in all different forms, but they need to get the stuff that works to help them like directly. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. So I thank you for that. All of us that consume water or electricity or any of those other services from industrial control systems, thank you, right?
They're such amazing people.
Rob, I just have 5 silly questions. You ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
All right.
3 words to describe yourself.
Candid, transparent, but respectful.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Captain Crunch.
If you wrote a book about, if you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Fat, but sometimes right.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
Favorite hacker movie? Oh,
Black Hat.
man.
2018.
Yeah, it's so not
Live Free
fair.
or Die Hard. That ICS stuff in it too.
I can't do Die Hard.
Real genius.
Honestly, like the honest answer is War Games, but like probably the funny answer would be Spy Games. Like Spy Games and the fact that he hacked. So Brad Pitt is one of the most accurate intelligence movies I've ever seen, where he talked about the fact that with a pack of chewing gum and a pack of cigarettes, you can hack anything. You can get anywhere. And he's totally right.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Oh, hey, Lee.
Live there. Okay, so obviously Mr. Rogers is my dad. Like that's the nicest human being ever. And I'm going to go with Carl Sagan as my other dad.
Nice.
It would be wonderful.
Rob, it was great having you here on Paul's Security Weekly.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, man. We're gonna have to bring you back. I feel like we just scratched.
I want
the
to talk
surface.
market multiples and crashing markets with you and VC valuations.
So we can geek out on that. Absolutely. Awesome. With that, we'll take a short break. Come back with Sumil, talk about firmware security. Stay tuned.